Yeah, my name is Erik Lindström, and I'm going to talk a little bit about SiriKit and our experiences working together with our customer Taxi Stockholm and what we did for them with SiriKit. Essentially, what I will try to go through is a little bit about what SiriKit is, what you can do with it. I'll talk a little bit about intents and intents UI, which are two frameworks. And then I'll go in a little bit on architecture, talk about how to handle these intents in your integrations, and round off with saying a few words on what we did for Taxi Stockholm and presenting some of the lessons that we have learned along the way. So SiriKit is basically a way for you as an app developer to make part of your app's services available through iOS, through built-in applications in iOS. So you're exposing features that you're supporting or that you may be supporting within your app through the actual system. Like in this case, well, at least as far as I know, as of today, they will be available within the Siri application in iOS and Maps. Which might make the name SiriKit a little bit misleading, because you might think that this is only about voice control, but that is not really the only case. In the future, we might see other applications from Apple opening up for this too. We don't really know. But from a developer's point of view, it consists of two frameworks, one called Intents and one called Intents UI. Intents is essentially where you integrate your app against all of the different features supported by SiriKit, while Intents UI lets you put your brand onto your integrations too. Apple has divided all of the features excuse me, supported into different domains. So if you do a VoIP app, for example, then you might choose to integrate that. If you do a workouts app, then you might integrate that in order to be able to start workouts through Siri. Or if you do messaging or payments, photos, etc. Some of these may require additional support from Apple, though, to be developed. And some of these might only be available to, well, automotive vendors. So intents. An intent is a very fundamental concept of SiriKit. An intent is something that a user initiates in some way. This could be through speech, but it could also be through another type of interaction in an application. They are very domain specific, and you cannot really do whatever you like with this. It could be a thing such as request a ride to go somewhere, or list available ride options to somewhere. They also come with a context. And context could be things such as people. It could be things such as different locations that you would like to go to, or times of the day. And each intent, from a developer's point of view, has a corresponding intent handling protocol, which is what you will integrate in order to be able to handle that intent. This is done through extensions. So you don't really integrate SiriKit within your own app, but you integrate it within an extension. Intents UI, on the other hand, is something that you can use if you would like to put your own brand on your intent handling. It lets you present a custom view within Siri or within Maps or within any other type of application that would allow this. And essentially, it consists of an extension that you make, a specific type of Intents UI extension, and you have your own view controller that cannot really do too many things, but it can configure one view, and it can present some information in that under certain limitations, such as a specific size that you need to fit within. UI is only available to messaging, payments, ride bookings, and workouts at the moment. And the architecture of this whole thing is such that you have your application on the right side of this slide. What I try to illustrate with the outline around this is that it's basically all of the things that are bundled with your application. So your app, and you have some shared data blob there just under it, and then you have your extension or your extensions. These extensions communicate with Siri or with Maps through some sort of let's call it an intent routing thing called SiriKit in the middle there. This is a very important thing to keep in mind, because this really shows you that Siri cannot talk with your app. It cannot really, it cannot go directly to your app and ask for things. It has to go to your extension, meaning that if you, for example, need to share data between your application and your extension, you might need to do that through app groups or something along those lines. You can, of course, also do it on the server side. That's fully feasible too. But your app does not really even need to be running. This can happen without even ever invoking your app at all, as long as you have that extension in place. The flow of these things is fairly simple. You get an intent to do something. Let's say that you want to book a ride somewhere, or you want to start some activity or something like that, and this gets passed to you by either Siri or by Maps. Whereas your intents extension would handle that intent, or, well, yeah, handle it in one way or another. Either it could succeed or it could fail, or it might need some more parameters, and pass that back to Siri or Maps through SiriKit to let those take the next step. The intents UI flow is a little bit different. Where you come when you come to this this point, as you see on the slide, then it's expected that your intent has been handled by someone else already, supposedly your extension, your intents extension. And now Siri or Maps is simply going to ask you to configure a UI with an interaction. This interaction is more or less just a container for the intent. So your intents UI extension gets to know what intent was handled, or what could have been handled at least, and is asked to configure its own views to illustrate this in one way or another. And then it just tells Siri or Maps that it's done configuring whatever it should be configuring. One thing to keep in mind here when implementing Intents UI is that even though you get an interaction to configure your UI according to an intent, this does not necessarily mean that the intent has been completely handled yet. You will actually not really know if anything at all has happened. And this can cause some confusion. What it essentially means is that you might want to do things like configure some placeholder texts, or do something that makes you prepared to be presented on screen, even though you don't really know if you're done doing what you should be doing at this point. And then at some point later, you may be presented on the screen. This is typically going to be as, well, you're going to be embedded within Siri or within Maps in one way or another. You will have one view controller that you can dispose in any way you like, but this view controller cannot create other view controllers and just present them. It's only going to be able to encapsulate them as child view controllers. As for the intent handling, there are 3 phases of the intent lifecycle that are fairly important to keep track of. These are resolve, confirm, and handle. So resolve is about figuring out whether or not the context around the intent is sufficient for you to be able to handle or do anything at all with the intent. If it would be the case that, for example, the intent is about calling a certain person, and you have a phone application, and you're looking that person up in your phone book, and let's say that that person has 3 different phone numbers, and you don't really know because the user did not specify which phone number of that person the user wanted to call, then this is the case where you can ask Siri to go back again and do something with that. Perhaps Siri can ask you to Siri can ask the user to choose between these 3 names. Please pick one, or these types of phone numbers, or something like that. So resolve is really about the input parameters, while confirm is more about the actual intent. Are we able to handle this right now? Can we do it right now? Does the user need to be authenticated within the app before we do it, or is everything ready? If you say that everything is okay, then you can expect that the user might at any point of time just say, okay, let's go ahead and do this. You can, of course, also fail. You can say, okay, I'm not ready to do this. The user needs to get into the app and authenticate itself, and after that, something can happen. When you do this, though, you cannot get Siri to present a nice text explaining what the user should do. But you can get Siri to tell the user that, okay, sorry, but you need to continue within the app. And you can leave enough context for the app to understand what the user was intending to do by passing a user activity back to the response object of confirm. So that's nice. Handle, on the other hand, is what's actually handling or performing any kind of task. So that's when you actually do the stuff. Also here you can of course fail in the same way and pass the user into the app, but it's not really nice to do that because it's going to look a little bit like some sort of error occurred, and that's why you're dumping the user. Resolve and confirm are generally, if not always, optional. So you don't really need to do those. You only need to implement handle. That's all, because that's essentially performing the task anyway. It might be very much needed to implement resolve because you might be very much depending on that the parameters are actually okay before you can execute the task. But it's all up to you. Same with confirm. It really depends on what you're aiming to do with your app. If you have everything you need anyway to just get going, then just do it with handle. It might also be added that not all of the intents are going to require you. I mean, some of these things, when you try to handle them, they will not even invoke the resolve methods of the intent handling protocol. Why? Well, probably they are not needed, or they might from one angle, for example, if you do it from Siri, but they might not if you do it from maps. It all depends a little bit on the context around it. So some words on what we did for Taxi Stockholm. Taxi Stockholm obviously fits into the category of ride booking, whereas we have implemented an intents extension and an intents UI extension. The ride booking domain of SiriKit includes only 3 intents, actually. This is the request ride intent, which is used by both Siri and Maps, get ride status intent, which is used by Siri and Maps too. Request ride is fairly self-explanatory. You ask Siri to get your ride, perhaps from a certain location to a certain location at a certain time for a number of people or something like that. And it gets passed to your intent handler. Get ride status is when you want to check what's going on with your requested ride. Let's say that you managed to handle that, and the user would like to know, okay, when's my taxi going to be here? Then the user can ask Siri, where's my taxi? And Siri might reply, yeah, okay, it'll be there in 5 minutes. List ride options is only used by Maps. I'm going to show you a screenshot of that a couple of slides away, but it's essentially about letting your intents handler provide a list of options. Let's say that you have standard fare or metered fare or something like that, or you might have a fixed priced option. Then you can just list these, and if you wish, provide an estimated time of arrival or an estimated price or a specific price, and then the user can pick and choose from these options. If you just request a ride from Siri and you have the Taxi Stockholm app installed and you have done what you need to do within the app to actually get a ride, then this is what it's going to look like. So on the left side, you see how the UI looks just after requesting a ride. You ask Siri, get a ride, and Siri tells you that, okay, Taxi Stockholm can get you a taxi there in 4 minutes. Would you like to request it? This means that the input parameters are resolved. In this case, we have received the location by Siri, as it was able to figure out where you are right now, and it figured that, okay, this must be the pickup location. We also know that we're able to perform this because confirmed has been handled. And then you will actually request the taxi, and it's going to show you what's on the right side of the slide if that's successful. The UI in your Intents UI handler can update itself, as you see here. It's been changing status to okay, showing you that the car is on its way and it's going to be there soon. If you do it from Maps, on the other hand, it looks a little bit different. You can reach this leftmost screenshot in case you, when you open Maps, you put out a pin somewhere, you tap Directions, and then switch to the Ride tab. Then it's going to show you a list of available ride options from all of the apps that you have installed on your phone that support SiriKit. So on this screenshot, you see that there's only one option available, the meter fare. The middle screen shows what happens if you tap Book. And the rightmost screen shows you how it looks with our custom UI in there after you have requested the ride, and showing you that it's on its way, you're going to pay in the car, and so on. So some lessons that we've learned on the way here that we thought might be interesting to share is that, okay, intent handling protocols have methods for resolve, confirm, and handle. That's fine. And each of the methods in the protocol do come with a completion block, which is, well, what you should be calling when you've done whatever you're supposed to do. But it's important to note that nothing is going to hold a strong reference to your intent handler once you have returned from that method. And this means that whatever kind of resources that you need to have access to, they really need to be captured within that block that you're dispatching away to do somewhere else. Otherwise, you're just going to be deallocated, and you're not going to get back to that. This means that properties should generally not be used in intent handlers, because if you try to put stuff in your intent handler and you try to access that later, you might find that self is gone and you're not able to reach anything at all. You should always try to keep your methods implemented in such way that they were always called from a cold start. So you need to just create whatever you need just before you use it, and then you call the completion block. That's all. You can do things asynchronously, that's fine, but you just have to keep in mind to keep a strong reference to whatever you need. And when it comes to the intent frameworks objects, it's important to note, if you don't see it immediately by looking at the header files, because not everyone might be inspecting the header files anyway, it's good to know that the objects in there are generally using copy semantics. So example number one about asynchronous calls. Well, you see here I'm doing some kind of asynchronous call from my API service in some way, and in there I'm trying to use something from weak self. That's just going to be nil at that point if it is weak. So you can absolutely not use it to cache any sort of data. If you do that, then, well, just not going to fly. About the copy semantics, I guess that the most important thing to note here is that you really, if you, for example, would switch place of that lowest red line of code and the line just above it, then you will have assigned ride status to an object, and then you're going to try to reach, if you switch line on them, then exactly, then it's going to be, then it's not going to be working out, because then the intent response object will keep a copy of that object, and you're not going to be modifying that object. You're going to be modifying your own object instead. Some other general observations is that you cannot really rely on anything to happen in a certain order. That's kind of what I was talking about when it comes to handling an intent and trying to present your UI without knowing that your intent is actually handled. You don't really know what kind of status you should show there. Things can happen in any order at all. This makes, of course, debugging pretty tricky. It is tricky to debug intents and intents UI extensions simultaneously. I strongly recommend print logging. That's that's what's been, well, not most helpful, but one of the more helpful tools when doing this integration. And it's also a very good idea to check out the sample code from Apple, because that might help bridge some gaps in the documentation. The documentation says a lot, but it doesn't really cover all of the details that you might need to know. And there are some good comments in the example code that you might want to check out if you decide to do any of these integrations. That's all. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Erik. So we might have some questions for you from the audience, if that's okay. Yeah, we can have a few ones. So anybody who has a question, please raise your hand. Come by with a mic.
Is your, as a user of this, is your location and other details about you shared all the way through to the intent and to the app? So say in that example you had a pin on the maps,
Yeah.
and you switch to the rides tab and it had all that. So do all of those apps get my location at that point in a way that's identifiable?
Yeah, they are going to get, I mean, the extensions of those apps are going to get the locations, because otherwise they would not be able to estimate the pickup time and such things. That might influence the price as well if they're exposing that. So yeah, they're not specifically going to get your location, but they will get the location of the intent. So it will not say that this is your current location. It will say that this is the pickup location of the intent.
No more questions? Okay, well then, thank you so much once again, Erik.